"Listen here, sweetheart. You're just a secretary," sneered Mr. Harrison, the company's vice president, as he leaned back in his leather chair with a condescending smirk. "Your job is to type, file, and keep your mouth shut about things that are way above your pretty little head. If you can't handle that simple concept, maybe you should find work somewhere that appreciates mouthy women who don't know their place." What these arrogant executives at Morrison & Associates didn't know was that the quiet little secretary they had just fired for speaking up about their illegal accounting practices was Catherine Elizabeth Sterling, wife of FBI Director William Sterling. And in exactly 72 hours, their comfortable world of corruption and workplace harassment was about to come crashing down around them. My name is Catherine Sterling, and this is the story of how speaking truth to power in 1975 cost me my job, but ultimately brought down one of Chicago's most corrupt law firms. I was 35 years old then, a woman with a master's degree in accounting who had chosen to work as a secretary because it was one of the few positions available to women in corporate America, regardless of their qualifications. Most people who met me saw only what they expected to see: a quiet, efficient secretary who kept the office running smoothly while the important men made the important decisions. They had no idea that I was married to one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the country, or that my simple secretarial work had given me access to evidence of crimes that would eventually land several of them in federal prison. Growing up as the daughter of Irish immigrants in Boston during the 1940s, I learned early that intelligence and hard work didn't always translate into opportunities for women, no matter how qualified we might be. My father, Patrick O'Brien, was a policeman who taught me that justice sometimes required standing up to powerful people who believed they were above the law. "Katie girl, there's nothing more dangerous than a man who thinks his position makes him untouchable," he would tell me during our walks through the neighborhood. "But there's also nothing more satisfying than watching such a man learn that everyone answers to someone, and nobody's too important for consequences." The decision to work as a secretary despite holding advanced degrees was both practical and strategic, as it provided financial independence, while also allowing me to contribute to my husband's career without creating the kind of conflicts of interest that might arise if I pursued law enforcement work directly. William and I had agreed early in our marriage that my role would be to maintain a normal life and perspective that could balance his intense involvement with federal law enforcement. "Kat, I need you to be my connection to the regular world," he would say during our evening conversations. "Your experiences with ordinary people in everyday situations help me remember what we're really fighting for." The position at Morrison & Associates seemed perfect when I applied in early 1975, a prestigious law firm that handled corporate clients and high-profile cases, with opportunities to use my accounting background while learning about legal practice from some of Chicago's most successful attorneys. During my interview, senior partner James Morrison had emphasized the firm's commitment to excellence and ethical practice. "Mrs. Sterling, we pride ourselves on maintaining the highest standards of professional conduct," he had assured me. "Our clients trust us to handle their most sensitive legal matters with absolute discretion and integrity." What I discovered during my first few weeks on the job was that Morrison & Associates' reputation for excellence was built on a foundation of fraud, embezzlement, and systematic harassment of female employees who dared to question unethical practices. The highest standards that Mr. Morrison had described during my interview apparently didn't apply to how the firm actually conducted business when nobody was watching. The accounting irregularities I noticed were subtle at first: small discrepancies in client trust fund accounts, billing practices that seemed designed to inflate charges, and document alterations that changed the terms of settlements after they had been agreed upon. As someone with extensive training in financial analysis, I could see patterns that might not be obvious to people without specialized knowledge. "These numbers don't add up correctly," I mentioned to my supervisor, Mrs. Patricia Walsh, during one of our weekly meetings. "I think there might be some errors in how we're tracking client payments and trust fund distributions." Mrs. Walsh's response was immediate and defensive, suggesting that my concerns were based on misunderstanding rather than legitimate irregularities. "Catherine, you need to understand that legal accounting is much more complex than regular bookkeeping," she explained dismissively. "These lawyers have been practicing for decades, and they know how to handle client funds properly. Your job is to input the numbers they give you, not to question their professional judgment about financial matters. But the discrepancies I was observing weren't matters of complexity or professional judgment. They were evidence of systematic theft from client accounts and fraudulent billing practices that violated both legal ethics and federal banking regulations. The more I studied the firm's financial records, the clearer it became that Morrison & Associates was operating as much as a criminal enterprise as a law firm. The sexual harassment that pervaded the office culture was as blatant as the financial crimes, with male attorneys and executives treating female employees as personal servants whose primary job was to tolerate unwanted attention and inappropriate behavior. "Come here, sweetheart, and take some dictation," Mr. Harrison would say, patting his lap suggestively. "I've got some really hard material that needs a woman's gentle touch." When women complained about such treatment, they were told they were being too sensitive or unprofessional. The breaking point came when I witnessed Mr. Morrison and 2 other partners discussing how to hide evidence of their embezzlement from a client audit that was scheduled for the following week. "We need to make sure those trust fund transfers look legitimate," Morrison was saying as I delivered files to his office. "Catherine can help us create some backdated documentation that shows proper authorization for the withdrawals. She's good with numbers, and she's too mousy to cause any trouble." Before you continue this incredible story of courage, justice, and the power of speaking truth to power, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales about ordinary people who refuse to accept corruption and change the world by standing up for what's right. Their assumption that I would participate in document fraud because I was too mousy to cause trouble was both insulting and revealing, showing how completely they underestimated the women they employed and abused. That evening, I made the decision that would ultimately cost me my job, but would also expose their criminal enterprise to federal investigation. "William, I need to tell you about some things I've observed at work," I said to my husband during dinner. "I think my employers are involved in activities that might interest the Bureau." William's response was immediate and professional, as he understood the implications of what I was describing, while also recognizing the personal risks I faced by reporting criminal activity by my own employers. "Kat, if what you're telling me is accurate, then we're talking about federal crimes that require investigation," he said carefully. "But you need to understand that coming forward will probably cost you your job and might make you a target for retaliation. Are you prepared for those consequences?" The decision to document and report the criminal activities I had witnessed was both frightening and liberating, as I realized I couldn't continue working for people who were stealing from clients while treating employees like disposable objects. "I became a secretary to support our family and contribute to society," I told William. "I didn't sign up to be an accessory to fraud and embezzlement. If these people think they can use me to legitimize their crimes, they're about to learn how wrong they are." The confrontation that led to my firing occurred the following Monday, when I refused to create the backdated documents that Morrison had ordered me to prepare. "Mr. Morrison, I can't help you create false documentation," I told him firmly but respectfully. "What you're asking me to do would be fraudulent, and I can't participate in activities that violate federal law." His reaction was swift and predictable, as he realized that his mousy secretary was not going to be the compliant accomplice he had expected. The fury that erupted from James Morrison when I refused to participate in his document fraud scheme was immediate and volcanic, transforming the distinguished senior partner into a red-faced bully whose mask of professional respectability slipped completely. "How dare you question my instructions?" he roared, slamming his hand on his mahogany desk hard enough to make his coffee cup jump. "You're a secretary, not a lawyer, and you'll do exactly what I tell you to do, or you'll find yourself looking for work elsewhere. Do I make myself clear?" His threat was meant to intimidate me into compliance, but it had the opposite effect, strengthening my resolve to expose the criminal activities I had witnessed, rather than becoming an unwilling participant in their cover-up. "Mr. Morrison, I understand you're upset, but I cannot and will not create false documents," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. If you want to terminate my employment for refusing to commit fraud, that's your choice, but I won't compromise my integrity or violate federal law to protect your illegal activities. The meeting that followed in the conference room was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation, as Morrison assembled his fellow partners to present a united front of male authority designed to overwhelm what they perceived as secretarial insubordination. Vice President Harrison, Legal Counsel Thompson, and Operations Manager Davis arranged themselves around the polished table, like a tribunal preparing to pass judgment on an unruly servant who had forgotten her place. Mrs. Sterling, we're very disappointed in your attitude and your apparent inability to understand the hierarchy and professional expectations of this firm. Morrison began in the condescending tone that successful men often used when dealing with women who refused to accept subordinate status. Your job is to support the professional staff, not to question decisions made by people with decades of legal experience and responsibilities you couldn't possibly comprehend. Harrison leaned forward with the same predatory smirk he had worn during months of sexual harassment, clearly enjoying the opportunity to assert dominance over a woman who had consistently rejected his inappropriate advances. Sweetheart, you seem to have gotten some confused ideas about your role here, he said with mock concern. Maybe spending too much time around legal documents has given you delusions about being qualified to make legal judgments. But that's not your job, is it? My job is to maintain accurate records and handle financial documentation with integrity, I replied, refusing to be cowed by their collective attempt at intimidation. What you're asking me to do violates both professional ethics and federal law. I have a responsibility to decline participation in illegal activities, regardless of who orders me to commit them. Thompson, the legal counsel who should have been most concerned about the ethical implications of their demands, instead chose to lecture me about loyalty and discretion, as if these values required complicity in criminal activity. Mrs. Sterling, successful law firms depend on employees who understand the importance of confidentiality and trust, he explained pompously. When you question the judgment of senior partners, you're undermining the foundation of professional relationships that make our work possible. I understand confidentiality and trust, I responded, but neither of those concepts requires me to participate in document fraud or embezzlement. Professional relationships should be built on legal and ethical foundations, not on employees' willingness to ignore criminal activity. My direct challenge to their authority was clearly not what they had expected from the quiet secretary they had hired to handle routine tasks. Davis, the operations manager who oversaw the firm's financial practices, made the tactical error of trying to gaslight me about the evidence I had observed, apparently believing that I was too naive or unintelligent to understand what I had seen. I think you're misinterpreting routine business practices as something sinister, he said with patronizing concern. Complex legal and financial transactions often look irregular to people who don't understand the full context. Perhaps you should trust the professionals to handle matters that require specialized knowledge. His attempt to make me doubt my own observations and training was both insulting and revealing, demonstrating how completely these men underestimated the women they employed, while also confirming that they were indeed engaged in the criminal activities I had documented. Mr. Davis, I have a master's degree in accounting and 15 years of experience in financial analysis, I replied calmly. I'm fully qualified to recognize embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering when I see them. The only thing I don't understand is how you think you can continue these activities without facing consequences. The silence that followed my direct accusation was electric with tension, as the four men realized that their quiet secretary was not going to be intimidated into compliance or convinced to doubt her own professional judgment. Morrison's face went through several shades of red before settling on a dangerous purple that suggested barely controlled rage. Mrs. Sterling, you are terminated immediately for insubordination, unprofessional conduct, and failure to perform assigned duties, Morrison announced, his voice shaking with fury. You will clean out your desk and leave the premises within the hour. Security will escort you to ensure you don't take any confidential materials that belong to this firm. Harrison couldn't resist adding his own vindictive commentary to my dismissal, revealing the personal animus that had motivated much of his harassment throughout my employment. "Good luck finding another job, sweetheart," he sneered. "We'll make sure every firm in Chicago knows about your attitude problem and your inability to work cooperatively with management. You'll be lucky to find work as a file clerk after we're finished with your reputation." The threat of professional blacklisting was meant to be the final blow that would teach me the cost of challenging male authority in corporate America. But these men had no idea that their attempt to destroy my career was about to backfire spectacularly. "Gentlemen, I appreciate your concern about my future employment prospects," I said, as I gathered my personal belongings. "But I don't think you understand the position you've put yourselves in by firing me for refusing to commit federal crimes." The security escort that accompanied me to my desk and out of the building was both humiliating and liberating, as I realized that I was finally free from the toxic environment that had required me to witness criminal activity while tolerating sexual harassment and professional discrimination. "Ma'am, I'm sorry about how this went down," the security guard whispered as we waited for the elevator. "Most of us know you're good people, and these guys have had this coming for a long time." The phone call I made to William from the lobby of the Morrison & Associates building was brief and businesslike, as we both understood that my termination had just escalated our situation from internal investigation to active federal case. "They fired me for refusing to create fraudulent documents," I reported, "and they threatened to blacklist me throughout Chicago's legal community if I cause any trouble for them." "Kat, I'm sorry they put you through that, but I'm also proud of you for standing up to them," William replied. "Now we can move forward with a full investigation, without worrying about conflicts of interest or compromised evidence. These gentlemen are about to learn that threatening a federal agent's wife for refusing to commit crimes was not their wisest career decision." The satisfaction I felt at his words was tempered by the practical reality that I was now unemployed and facing potential career sabotage from powerful men who believed they could destroy anyone who crossed them. But I also knew that I had done the right thing, and that sometimes doing the right thing requires accepting short-term costs to achieve long-term justice. The investigation that began 72 hours after my termination was swift, thorough, and devastating to Morrison & Associates, as FBI agents armed with federal warrants descended on the firm's offices to seize the very documents that Morrison had wanted me to falsify. The irony was not lost on me that the evidence they had tried to force me to help them hide would now be used to prosecute them for the federal crimes I had refused to help them cover up. "Mrs. Sterling, your documentation and testimony have provided us with the foundation for one of the most significant white-collar crime prosecutions in Chicago history," explained Special Agent Patricia Martinez as she interviewed me about my observations during my employment at the firm. "The evidence you've provided shows a pattern of embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering that extends back at least 5 years and involves millions of dollars in stolen client funds. The search warrants that were executed simultaneously at the firm's offices, the partners' homes, and their various bank accounts revealed the full scope of their criminal enterprise, including offshore accounts, forged documents, and a sophisticated system for stealing from client trust funds while maintaining the appearance of legitimate legal practice. These men thought they were untouchable because they had money, connections, and social status," William explained to me as we reviewed the evidence that agents had collected. They never imagined that their own employee would have the knowledge and courage to expose them. The media coverage that followed the arrests was extensive and sensational, as Chicago newspapers and television stations covered the downfall of one of the city's most prestigious law firms. "FBI raids expose million-dollar fraud scheme at prominent law firm," read the headline in the Chicago Tribune. "Female employees' courage brings down corporate criminals," announced the Sun-Times. The stories focused not only on the crimes themselves, but also on the workplace harassment and intimidation that had been used to silence potential witnesses. The support I received from other women who had experienced similar harassment and discrimination was overwhelming and deeply moving, as my case became a symbol of the changes that were beginning to transform American workplaces in the mid-1970s. "You did what so many of us have wanted to do but were afraid to try," wrote one woman in a letter to the editor. "Thank you for showing that powerful men can be held accountable when brave women refused to be silenced. The legal proceedings that followed were complex and lengthy, as federal prosecutors built cases against Morrison, Harrison, Thompson, and Davis for crimes ranging from embezzlement and fraud to conspiracy and money laundering. My testimony was crucial in establishing the pattern of criminal activity and the attempts to involve employees in covering up illegal practices. Mrs. Sterling's refusal to participate in document fraud prevented these defendants from destroying evidence that was essential to our prosecution, explained U.S. Attorney Janet Morrison, no relation to the defendant, during her opening statement. The defense strategy employed by Morrison's attorneys was predictable and desperate, as they attempted to portray me as a disgruntled employee who had misunderstood routine business practices and blown minor irregularities out of proportion. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a case about a vindictive secretary who couldn't handle the demands of professional employment, argued Morrison's lawyer. Mrs. Sterling was terminated for insubordination and poor performance, and she's using her husband's position to pursue a personal vendetta against her former employers. Their attempt to discredit my testimony by attacking my character and motivations backfired spectacularly when the evidence demonstrated beyond any doubt that the financial irregularities I had reported were indeed criminal activities that had defrauded clients of millions of dollars. The defense would have you believe that a master's degree in accounting doesn't qualify someone to recognize embezzlement, Prosecutor Martinez responded during her rebuttal. They would have you believe that refusing to create false documents is somehow evidence of incompetence rather than integrity. The convictions that resulted from the trial were comprehensive and satisfying, as all 4 defendants were found guilty on multiple counts and sentenced to significant prison terms. Morrison received 12 years in federal prison, Harrison got 8 years, Thompson received 6 years, and Davis was sentenced to 4 years. The firm was dissolved, and millions of dollars in assets were seized to compensate victims of their fraud schemes. The professional vindication I experienced was sweet, but secondary to the personal satisfaction of knowing that I had stood up to powerful men who believed they were above the law and accountability. Kat, you didn't just expose criminal activity, William told me during the celebration dinner we held after the verdicts were announced. You showed that integrity and courage are more powerful than money and intimidation. You proved that doing the right thing matters, even when it costs you personally. The job offers that began arriving from law firms and corporations across the country demonstrated that integrity and competence were valued more highly than the former employers had believed. Mrs. Sterling, we would be honored to have someone of your caliber and proven integrity join our organization, wrote the managing partner of a prestigious Boston law firm. Your courage in exposing criminal activity while facing personal and professional retaliation shows exactly the kind of character we want in our senior staff. The position I ultimately accepted was with the FBI's white-collar crime division, where my accounting background and experience with corporate fraud made me a valuable asset in investigating financial crimes. It seems appropriate that someone who exposed corruption should help prevent it in the future, I said during my interview with the Bureau's personnel director. I've learned that sometimes the best way to fight crime is to refuse to tolerate it, even when tolerance seems easier or safer. The mentoring work I began doing with young women entering professional careers became one of the most rewarding aspects of my post-Morrison life, as I helped others understand that they didn't have to accept harassment or compromise their integrity to succeed in male-dominated environments. The most important thing to remember is that your worth isn't determined by what powerful people think of you. I would tell young women during the workshops I conducted. Your value comes from your character, your competence, and your willingness to stand up for what's right. The changes in workplace harassment policies that followed high-profile cases like mine represented progress toward the kind of professional environment where competence mattered more than gender, and where reporting criminal activity was seen as loyalty to justice rather than betrayal of employers. Mrs. Sterling's case helped establish important precedents about employee rights and responsibilities when witnessing illegal activities. Legal scholars would later write about the impact of my testimony and the subsequent prosecutions. The 25 years that have passed since my termination from Morrison & Associates have brought enormous changes to how society views workplace harassment, gender discrimination, and employee rights. But the fundamental lesson remains the same. Sometimes doing the right thing requires accepting personal costs, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in activities that violate your principles. The quiet secretary, who was fired for speaking up about illegal activities, became a symbol of the truth that integrity and courage can overcome money and intimidation when people are willing to stand up for justice. The men who thought they could silence me by threatening my career learned that some people can't be bought, bullied, or broken when they're fighting for what's right. Looking back on that confrontation in 1975, I understand that my refusal to create fraudulent documents was about more than just one instance of workplace pressure. It was about the choice between complicity and resistance, between accepting injustice and fighting for accountability, between being a victim and being a force for change. The legacy of that decision lives on in the precedents established by successful prosecutions, the policies that protect whistleblowers from retaliation, and the understanding that everyone, regardless of position or gender, has both the right and the responsibility to refuse participation in criminal activity. Sometimes the most important word in the English language is no, especially when powerful people expect automatic compliance with illegal or unethical demands.